Good morning. We are going to present about English class, and we will be telling you about our Romeo and Juliet project. I'm Elizabeth. I'm from Oregon.
My name is Katie, and I'm from Minnesota.
My name is Jessica, and I'm from San Diego, California.
This semester in English class, we learned about Romeo and Juliet, and we're going to tell you about what we learned by reading Romeo and Juliet. The big question that we talked about this semester was, how can enemies make peace with each other? And we learned a couple of different concepts that helped us to understand this question. The first was the concept of love. This is when people really, really like each other. The next concept was,
So we are going to ask you what you think about love. So you have to get ready to vote. You are going to put your thumb up for yes, and you're going to put your thumb down for no. So get ready for the question. The question is, would you marry someone even if your family did not like that person? Yes or no? Okay.
we also learned about the concept of enemies. Enemies are people who really, really don't like each other or don't get along for some reason. In Romeo and Juliet, the enemies were the two families. We also learned about the concept of suicide. Suicide is when you feel so bad that you decide to kill yourself. It's a very severe, extreme situation. And in Romeo and Juliet, the characters loved each other but could not be together, and so they decided to kill themselves. So we each learned something when we were learning about Romeo and Juliet, and we're going to tell you what we learned. For example, I learned that in the story, the two people could not love each other, but by their sacrifice, the families realized that they could make peace. And so this was an example of one way that enemies can come together and make peace with each other.
So when we ask the question, how can enemies make peace with each other, I learned about a real-world example of not just a long time ago, but actually now, two people who are from different families who didn't like each other because of religion, and they faced a similar struggle and had to deal with how to communicate with each other's families about their differences and why they actually wanted to try to make peace together. And we'll talk a little more about that later.
I also learned that how can enemies make peace with each other? I learned that communication is really, really important. The two families had to communicate in order for there to be peace.
Okay, so we have another time for you to tell us what you think. This time, we are going to ask you to write on your whiteboard. So all of you should have your whiteboard, and everyone get a pen. Now, what you are going to do is you are going to think hard with your partner, and you're going to write, what do you think would be strong enough to make lifelong enemies, people who have been enemies for a long, long, long time, forgive each other and make peace? So I'll say the question again. What would be enough, what would be something that could make enemies start to be friends? Does everyone have a pen? Do you all understand the question? Does anyone not understand the question? Okay, so write your answer.
Now we'll tell you about the project.
So the project that we did was acting. We did a skit. And the first thing that we did for this was we read the book, Romeo and Juliet. Then we chose our characters and decided on props. Then we decided exactly what scene we wanted to act out. Whichever part of the book we thought was the most interesting. And we performed the skit in front of a lot of people. We memorized our lines, and we had to use a lot of emotion and loud voices to act.
So something that I learned while we were reading the book, but also when we were doing the play, was really thinking about how this love that Romeo and Juliet had made them do something that I disagree with. I thought it was too much to kill yourself. And it made me wonder, does love really make people do crazy things all the time? Like in this example, it did, but I also think maybe sometimes we don't have to be that crazy when we're in love.
I learned that you can use your voice and gestures to act in a way that convinces people that you really do feel this certain way.
I thought the most interesting part of this was I always follow what my parents want me to do, and it was really interesting for me to read and pretend to be a person that was going against what their parents wanted me to do. So in the scene, I had to tell my mother I didn't want to do what she was telling me to do, and it was an interesting and new feeling for me.
So one of the things that, as a group, we've been talking about, what did we learn about the world, or how can we connect this to things now? Because Romeo and Juliet was a story from a long time ago in a really different place, and we all agreed that one of the most interesting things we learned about was a connection to the real world about two people who fell in love. They were Huda and Arafat, and it's a story from now, and it's real, and it's a problem that a lot of people have because there are places in the world where two groups of people live in the same place, but they don't agree with each other. And in this situation, these were two groups of people who have different religion, but Huda and Arafat fell in love, even though they're from different religions. And so we just talked a lot about how there's still this problem of needing to communicate. There are still groups of people who are enemies, but what if we don't want to be enemies anymore? And how can we make peace?
We also just thought it was really interesting because our school is one of those places where there's people who have different ideas about lots of things. So maybe some people come from schools that are really different than here, and when we have to work together in a group, we have to figure out how to work together, even if maybe it's really hard to communicate. So that felt like a really interesting connection to us.
Thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you.